All right. I think I will just start the meeting since we have just 30 minutes to get over all the questions. Sorry.
Right.
So before we start, we would like to thank you, Amanda, for your valuable time in joining this interview with us. And we're very honored and grateful to have you here.
Oh, look, for goodness sake. Yes, I'm very happy to help you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Andrew, for being here in this early morning as well. I would like to give a brief overview of what the interview would look like. So this will be just a semi-structured interview, and each of us have categories of questions we would like to ask you, and we are very excited to hear your thoughts on those questions. And for the purpose of this interview, we would like to record it so we can refer to it for the assignment. So would that be okay with you, Amanda?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Okay.
Recording in progress.
Right. Thanks, Laviva. So I would like to introduce myself first, and then as we move to the next categories, my teammates will also give a brief introduction about themselves as well. So we have Laviva in the group, Trinity, Henry, and Glassy, and myself, Shamli. So I am Sri Lankan, and I'm currently in Melbourne at the moment, so very fun for me. And next year, I would like to pursue medicine at the ANU Medical School. So that's a bit...
So what year are you all in of the Bachelor of Health Science at the moment?
We are finally a health science student.
Your final year, Bachelor of Health Science. Okay. And this is part of a research project that you do? Is this, something else? How does this fit into your course?
So this is for our health course. So we are learning about health professions and how to apply for jobs and research and other career options for next year. So we wanted to interview someone in the health profession to get an idea about how things work. So this is it.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Good.
Great. So without further ado, I'll just dive into the first question for you. And as I just introduced, we are all finally a health science students. So we are looking at different options for next year. Some of us want to do medical school, other health professions, research and more. And as you are a health professional, it would be really beneficial for us to hear about your medical pathway and what inspired you to become a doctor.
Okay. So that's the first question, is it?
Yes.
Okay. So a bit of a circuitous story into medicine, given my age, and most people who did medicine at that stage went straight from school to medicine. So as a young child, medicine had always interested me, and my best friend, when we were at primary school, she was going to be an anthropologist and I was going to be the doctor, and we were going to go exploring in South America. And interestingly, I ended up as a medic and she ended up as an anthropologist. But when I was at high school, I got much more interested in the humanities. I did a lot of debating, I did a lot of theatre work, I did a lot of, English and history with the subjects I excelled in. And I was umming and ahhing about what I really wanted to do, and I sort of wanted to change the world. Then when I first left school, this is a bit of a circuitous story, but I think it helps to understand. When I first left school, I actually went and worked as a nanny in Bangladesh for the Australian High Commissioner. And it completely put me off medicine because what I saw was Western people and organisations coming in to do Band-Aid stuff in a country. I worked with a lot of Australian volunteers, well, not a lot, but some Australian volunteers, because the children I was meant to be looking after were at school during the day. And I did various things there, but they closed the universities down, which put an end to me going anyway. So I worked with some volunteers at a hospital, and this was not that long after the war of separation between what was then East Pakistan and West Pakistan and the independence of Bangladesh. So there were a lot of war-injured people, and it just was really distressing because people would do their best in physio and rehab, and these people would go back to villages with no jobs, with no income, and would be begging, or it seemed to me that it was the wrong end of the stick. And so I thought, oh well, maybe I'll do something else. So I came back and actually started doing an arts law degree, and after a few years decided that law was not for me, but I was loving the arts part. And over that couple of years, I found myself getting increasingly drawn to talking to people about or reading medical things or thinking about medical things. And so after I ended up doing honours in English, and then I applied for medicine. So it was a bit of a circuitous route. You know, it was always in the back of my mind, but it was something that I had to reconcile. How can you do something useful with medicine in a context where I'd seen it as Band-Aid stuff, you know, and that might have been my youth and inexperience then. But at that time in Bangladesh, it was the last big smallpox epidemic, and you know, so public health sort of was a bit of an interest and a motivation, I suppose, in thinking about doing medicine. Anyway, so I did, and I was lucky enough to have a choice of medical schools, and I ended up going to Newcastle, which was then a very new medical school. I'm probably taking too long in your answers, but it interested me in its focus on community and its new educational methods. And I think that's important because that's what really sparked my interest in medical education. And so when I went over to Western Australia and did my internship, I was surrounded by people who hadn't had a lot of clinical training. It was a very traditional degree then, who was scared of asking questions of their registrars or consultants, completely different medical education focus and background than I had. So that got me interested in that. So that's sort of how I got. And I was one of those people who really liked every single term they did and wanted to do it. You know, I did an O&G term and that's what I wanted to do. And then I did a paediatrics term, and then I did a surgical term. And what ended up interesting me, I did a lot of emergency work as a junior doctor, and I loved that. I loved the variety. I loved the practicalness of doing things. But I found myself increasingly going up onto the wards to find out what had happened to the patients and following them up. And so I made a move into general practice after that.
That's very interesting. And something that I would like to touch on is how like your motivation was put off by a couple of things that happened. And like the COVID-19 pandemic, it also had a big impact on how medical schools and medical students pursue medicine. And I found a very interesting study that looked at the students' willingness to become doctors before and after the pandemic, and also specialized in respiratory medicine and infectious diseases. And interestingly, they found there was a decreased willingness to become doctors and to practice in respiratory and infectious medicine.
Okay, that's very interesting, because I was just recently on a meeting of all the deans of New South Wales medical schools, and they have all had markedly increased numbers of applications for people doing medicine for next year.
That is very interesting, because I thought it was very interesting to hear that there is a decreased willingness to become doctors due to the pandemic.
Yeah,
and I was wondering, like, do you personally think that the pandemic has an impact on the medical students at the ANU?
Well, I mean, that's a very broad question, and I'm not quite sure how to focus that. Of course, it's had an effect on the medical students, because it's had an effect on everybody and their learning. Has it had an effect on their motivation? I don't think so. And certainly, as I said, that your study said one thing, but the information from the New South Wales deans is a very different story. So has it had an effect? I don't know. I think there's an increasing interest in public health and awareness of how important public health is. And, you know, public health can be thought of something that's sort of not relevant to individual practitioners, but I think people have seen that very close link between health of communities and how you need to think about health of communities and things. The students I've talked to, it's more been about how we've all coped with the pandemic and, you know, the challenges of that. I think there's naturally, I think until vaccinations, there was naturally a fear of work for some, of working in hospitals and in COVID situations, whereas, I mean, the personality, others felt a very strong desire to help where they could. So, you know, we've had lots of students helping out at vaccination clinics, rurally, because that's my neck of the woods, supporting their GPs and their communities working on weekends, helping out in vaccination clinics and things. So, you know, I think it's a very individual thing how it's changed people. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda, for your thoughts on those questions. And I'll just pass it to the next person.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Amanda. As Xiaomi introduced before, I'm Labiba.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to going into medicine at ANU and
Right.
have a specific interest in undertaking the rural clinical stream.
Right.
So I guess going off of what inspires you to become a doctor, I read in your profile that you also have experience working in both rural and urban areas. And you're currently practicing in a rural small town, I believe. So I was curious as to what motivates you to practice in a rural setting. As you've mentioned, public health was a big motivation for you. So I guess what differences you found to be valuable working in a rural as opposed to an urban setting?
Okay, so I think two things. One is, I mean, public health comes down to the health of your community and knowing that. So I think three things. One is continuity of care. So I currently work in Braidwood and have had since 2005. So, you know, I know a lot of, I mean, you know, the patients I know their families, I know their children, I know their grandchildren of the older ones. And sometimes that's really helpful. And then obviously you've got to be completely confidential and you never talk about one family member, but sometimes in your head, somebody said something and you get a little click, now I understand what's happening there, you know, and I like that. And it also means you see medicine as not as episodic, but over time and how people's problems play out and change and people get better, you know, that's that. I think the other thing is the issue of generalism and not so much at Braidwood at the moment now I've got this job, but as I said, I spent quite a lot of time working in emergency department as a junior doctor and a registrar. So the ability to be able to use some of those skills is really important to me. You know, as I said, I don't now, I've got this university job, which is my full-time job, but, you know, I like being able to, you know, other practices, you know, set simple fractures, you know, suture, do some suturing, treat emergencies. You know, I like that sort of range of things that you, and looking after your own patients in hospital, which we can still do. We've got 4 hospital beds in Braidwood, but obviously not people who are seriously unwell. So those aspects of it, it's sort of a generalist, holistic sense of what you can do and the opportunities to pursue special skills, but still keep that very generalist perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, those were all things that I was interested in as well when I've read stories. But I guess specifically, if I wanted to bring it back to ANU, as the head of the Rural Clinical School, I imagine you have also dealt with the rural medical stream placements. So what advice would you give students like me who are interested in working in a rural area but are unsure of the support they will receive in terms of whether expectations about like such as what you have said will be met through the curriculum or in terms of just adjusting to the lifestyle?
Okay, well, the first thing is we give you an awful lot of information in first year about it and meet with all the students often and set up, well, now on Zoom panels where you can talk to some older students in the stream and you know, some younger doctors, GP obstetricians and people who work in ED and VMO. Essentially, the rural stream is chosen at the end of first year. It's a selective interview process. In second year, in a non-COVID world, you do some of your clinical skills, which normally happen a day a week at the Canberra Hospital. You do some of them in Queanbeyan with the Queanbeyan local doctors who work in ED, and one of them is a GP obstetrician and works on the ward, so and they look after their own patients on the ward. So as well as doing the formal curriculum that everybody does, you actually go and see these doctors' patients and can take history from real patients and sometimes examine them and things like that too. And then in third year, you go out for the whole year rurally, and people select where they want to go and who they want to go with. It's a sort of matching process. Each town has its own academic staff, ANU academic staff, both and professional staff. All your accommodations provided, and internet connections and all the accommodations fully furnished. You follow, in a sense, again, a bit like the clinical schools, the same core curriculum as the urban students do, in a different format, but you cover absolutely everything by the end of the year. And then there's all sorts of additional local stuff that comes in, that people have the opportunity to do. So, for example, down in Moruya, the academic, and in Cara, the academic coordinators are GP obstetricians. So if you're interested in women's health, you get the opportunity to do some of that, which you normally don't do till fourth year. One of them down in Bega is an anaesthetist. He was one of our first Royal Stream students down there. And Nathan's really interested in simulation work. So he does a lot of interprofessional sim work down there. So it's the same sort of core, but there's an awful lot of support, both from local staff and centrally. And you come together in these, we call them Royal Stream teaching blocks, 4 times a year, with things that are harder to do in smaller groups. So, yeah, and so we have sort of the southern people, Cooma, Bega and Bateman's Bay, Moruya, and then the northern group, which is Young Cara and Goulburn, meet. And that's good. Yeah. So does that sort of answer your questions? And then in fourth year, there are opportunities to go back to those towns to do medicine, surgery, women's health, anaesthetics, ED, and psychiatry. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really informative. Just for the constraints of the time, I might just move on to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you, Labiba.
Hi, Henry.
My name's Henry, and I'm one day hoping to work in rural Australia as a health professional. And I actually have a lot of family who lives out in Braidwood as well.
Oh, right.
Running the Altenberg Gallery.
Oh, right. I should have recognised that surname. Yes, I should have recognised that surname, yeah.
And as mentioned by Labiba, you are acting as the Associate Director of Rural and Indigenous Health and the head of the Rural Clinical School at the ANU.
Well, yeah, I'm not sort of acting, I am it. And the thing is, I sort of retired a bit, and then the person who took over my job became unwell, so I'm back in it until we find somebody else. Yeah. So I've been in that role since 2005. Okay. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I was just going to ask you, relating to that, why did you decide to transfer your career from clinical practice to your current associate director's role at the ANU?
To an academic role? Okay, well, it wasn't an either or. I mean, as I said, I got very interested in medical education after my experience at Newcastle and then going over to Western Australia. And when I was doing my GP training, I was working in a practice that was then run by the Department of General Practice in a very socioeconomically disadvantaged area of Perth. And I got, obviously because it was run by the department, we had a lot of students, there was a lot of teaching. So I got very interested in that. So for a number of years, I did a mixture of sort of half and half clinical work and half academic work. And continued that rurally as well, because it was at that time that Rural Clinical School started in WA. So I got involved with working with that. And then this job opportunity came up and I was approached about it, and I thought it was a nice mixture of all my interests in medical education, but still wanted to continue doing some clinical work. And so unfortunately that is only a day a week at the moment. But I suppose, for me, that's okay. Sometimes I get into practice, and I haven't been able to go with the border closures, but I get into practice and I have a great day with the patients, and I think to myself, oh my God, this is what I did my training for, not battling with various health bureaucracies.
Yeah.
But then I have teaching sessions with students and I just love them, and I like planning them and thinking about them. So for me, that's a good mix. All our academic coordinators in all those nodes do a mixture, and theirs is probably much more balanced towards clinical than academic and teaching, but they still might do 1 or 2 days a week. I think the most is 3 and the rest is clinical. So I think one of the amazing things about medicine is you get this incredible opportunity to do a whole range of things and balance them in a way that works for you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your response. I'll just have another question for you as well, and this one has a follow-up as well. And I was just wondering, in regards to rural and Indigenous health, do you think that there is a significant intersection between some of the issues impacting both rural and Indigenous health?
Probably no. I mean, yes, to some extent, but I think it's a historical accident that Indigenous health got lumped with rural, because we all know that the majority of Australia's Indigenous population live in cities. But obviously, the more remote you are, the higher the proportion of the population is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander if you're up in Australia. So, I mean, in terms of issues like access, yes, they're obviously common, and availability of services and the fact that, so much less Medicare money is spent rurally than urbanly. All those ones are the same, but I think there are very significant and very different issues facing our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I could just quickly ask then, in regards to access,
what
changes in attitude or infrastructure would you like to see implemented by us, Australia's future health workforce, to address those issues?
Well, I'm not sure about it. I mean, attitudes, I think, is wanting to make a change and having the confidence to push that through. What was the other one? Infrastructure. I think we have to really rethink how rural services are delivered and what supports there are and what are the models of care. I mean, very interestingly, the National Rural Health Alliance has sort of just recently put out a paper looking at maybe we need to, and it's something the group I'm involved in has been thinking about for a while, maybe we need to rethink rural health services. So instead of being a sort of, doctor-owned small business, they're more along the lines of an Aboriginal community-controlled health organisation, where it's a rural community-controlled health organisation that has a whole lot of people working in it, not necessarily on a fee-for-service basis. So I think the idea is we need to think creatively about new models of practice. I think the whole rural generalism thing is really great, because I think that is saying you do need different skills rurally in some ways as a practice as a doctor, but many of it is the same. But does that make sense? That's probably what. Okay, cool.
Thank you. And I'll just pass on now to the next. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Blessy.
Hi, Blessy.
Nice to meet you. I have a question. So you were a part of the team that published the Making the 2007 to 2010 Action Plan, Work for Women in Family Medicine in the Asia Pacific.
Right.
And your team and yourself identified a list of barriers to female doctors practicing as GPs, specific to the Asia Pacific, and it included like inequality of opportunity, lesser remuneration, and lack of clear career paths. In Australia, the gender share is significantly lesser the more specialised, lesser for females, the more specialised the medical career becomes, except for maybe obgyns and dermatologists. My question is, as aspiring doctors and women, we are signing up for like 12 to 15 years of just tertiary education.
Sorry, can you just slow down a bit? I'm just, the line's a bit blurry. I'm just having following you. Yeah.
Sorry.
So you're referring to something that I can barely remember, and I'm thinking, congratulations, you guys have done your homework so well. So gender issues, you're saying fewer women in some specialties.
Yes, yeah. So I'm saying the gender share in Australia for like the more specialized the doctors become, the less females there are proportional to males.
Yeah, I think that's changed. I mean, that is, you're right. Obs and gynae is different already, but I think if you look at the number of doctors in training, that is shifting, still shifting quite a lot in physicians training, even surgeon training, than it was, 10 years ago, and certainly was when we wrote that article. Yeah.
Right. So the question really was, as women and aspiring medical doctors,
Yeah.
should we be considering the feasibility of working in a male-dominated specialization along with our passion for the field when making these decisions?
I mean, the simple answer is, of course, you always have to think about that. But should it limit you in any way? Absolutely not. And I think there have been significant changes, particularly over the last 5 years. Remember the issues about sexual harassment with the College of Surgeons a few years ago. That's been a huge shake-up within that college in particular. But I think generally within health organisations, within government health districts who organise, hospitals where you do your training, it's so in terms of sort of the worst levels of being in a male-dominated profession, I think the issues about sexual harassment are certainly much, much more visible, and there are ways of dealing with that, but it's always the sort of often the unconscious biases. But I think, my sense of looking back is that it's changed enormously, and I think as by the time you people graduate, it's the younger consultants now who've come up in a very different environment than the people my age, and certainly, when we were training. So I would think it's something to be aware of, but as far as I'm aware, all of the craft groups that have smaller numbers of women have very strong women's groups within their colleges, and often, within the cities, there are, I have some very close female surgeon friends, and, they get a lot of support from their peers, but then it's a matter of them knowing who are the champions of women among the people in the hierarchy. Yeah.
Right. That's all I had to ask. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
good.
Just
Trinity?
super quick, yes, last question. So I'm currently in public health and epidemiology,
Right.
and I understand you were the chair of the Australian Asthma Handbook Guidelines Committee for about 10
Yep.
years.
Yep.
I was just wondering what sort of work that entailed and how you got into that.
Okay, how I got into it was that it was and asthma's always been an interest of mine. I mean, as a junior doctor, as a registrar, I can remember thinking, how come patients come into me saying, can you check my blood pressure? And I need another script of my, antihypertensive medications. Whereas I only ever saw my asthma patients when they were really sick and they had a flare up of their asthma. And I thought, what is it? These are both chronic diseases, but in one of them, people are proactively, my script's getting close to running out. I want my blood pressure checked. Or if they had hypertension, you check their blood pressure every visit. Whereas nobody thought like that about their illness. So that was a long-standing interest. A group of us who had very early research projects about asthma got together and formed a GPs in asthma group that, long story short, eventually we became a subcommittee of the National Asthma Council and did a lot of interesting work there in terms of GP education and getting MDS items changed. And then I got invited to chair the Guidelines Committee. So the simple process of that was not simple, but we would look at, we'd canvass people about what we thought the new issues were. We would commission research work. and we had working groups on each sort of topic. So one on paediatric asthma, one on acute asthma, one on various other aspects that included, they were always chaired by GPs because these are the only international guidelines designed for primary care, but would include a respiratory specialist, a pharmacist, a nurse practitioner as a minimum. And those groups would review the evidence of the questions that were asked and decide on recommendations. And then that would all come up to the guidelines committee. So, and all the members of the guidelines committee were involved in one or more working groups. So we all knew what was going on. And then the guidelines committee would make the final decisions and discuss anything that was, you know, contentious or, you know, there wasn't clear evidence about. And so, I mean, how I got into it was a long-term interest. And a lot of it was sort of managing, as any committee is, you know, managing individual peoples and their passions about these things and you know, finding consensus and agreement in a practical sense. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that was very good. Thank you.
Good.
Good. I think we're out of time.
No, you can have a
so
couple of minutes. I'll be a couple of minutes late for the next meeting. Yeah.
I mean, my last question was just how your work with like the handbook guidelines committee was different to work with like the Lung Foundation and that sort of thing. If there was any difference.
Well, I mean, that same group once, that GPs in asthma group was very active in the late 2000s. And at that stage, the Lung Foundation was just starting. And in fact, they asked if the same group could also be a GP group of the Lung Foundation. Within the Lung Foundation, we had a lot of impact changing the COPD guidelines and making them more primary care friendly, but and work with them on some spirometry stuff. So it's sort of been as an advisory group to the Lung Foundation, and there were GPs working on, for example, the COPD guidelines. Nick Glasgow, who was the sort of second dean of our medical school, worked on those. So not wildly dissimilar, but just focused on asthma rather than a broader group of, you know, and asthma and COPD are the respiratory conditions that we most often treat in general practice. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That sort of answer it?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
Cool.
I think that's everyone's questions done. Just
Okay.
want to thank you again for giving us your time. Basically,
Oh, it was
really informative.
interesting. And look, congratulations, all of you. You've obviously done a lot of good homework, and good luck. Hope to see you. Those of you who want to be here, I hope I see you next year.
Recording stopped.